Donald Trump has officially been indicted, arraigned, and pled not guilty. And this happened in Florida because this is where he lives and this is where the documents are in his home in Mar-a-Lago. And the document scandal is something that we see that has happened prior within the Clinton administration with the document scandal in his sock drawer. But the thing that's so perilous about this is that we've never seen an administration go after their future political rival within the United States. This is a historical precedent that's never been set throughout the entire history of the United States and every single facet of our democracy, which I don't even trust the structure of democracy as a whole in itself because it's not something that I believe is a system that can be trusted because at best democracy is subjugation of the minority, and the people who espouse to love democracy the most claim to care so much about the minority but don't care about when their democratic structure oppresses them throughout all ends. I cannot wait to go ahead and jump into this because, as per usual, so many people in the corporate press and the legacy media, and even so many in the independent landscape right now, are asking the wrong questions. They're going through this document, and honestly, I wonder if the reason that they're not actually asking the right questions is because they're failing to even go ahead and read the documents themselves. Let's go ahead and jump into this. This is secret information. Trump in an audio recording talks about not declassifying documents. From ABC News, it says the recording was part of an interview the former president gave for a book. Former President Donald Trump said in an audio recording in 2021 that he had taken classified information with him to his Florida home after leaving the White House. ABC News has confirmed. Trump is heard in the audio recording saying, as described to ABC News, "As president, I could have declassified, but now I simply can't." The recording was first reported Friday morning by CNN, was made as part of an interview Trump gave for a book, and was obtained by the special counsel's team. So, what this all deals with is a Presidential Records Act, and no one in the corporate press properly goes into this and actually explains what this is. They just mention it and then fly by it and expect you to understand what it means. And so many people are so completely illiterate when it comes to the structure of government and economics and history and how they correlate and how these different precedents have been set throughout time, which is completely understandable. It's a nebulous web that is incredibly hard to navigate and it's really hard to map mentally. But it's well worth it in the end times because when you come to the point where it's necessary for you to understand these things, it really helps for you to be able to create these mental pathways for you to understand the structure that you're dealing with. It says, a federal grand jury voted to indict Trump on at least 7 federal charges late Thursday as part of an investigation into handling a list of classified documents. Sources familiar with the matter told ABC News. The indictment comes after more than 100 documents with classified markings were found at Trump's Mar-a-Lago resort in August 2022. I'm more surprised that they didn't mention that Trump had like 13,000 documents in his home, and we see this with the pictures that show all the boxes with all of the documents just stacked up, whether it's just like in the foyer or there's some in the bathroom, and some of them say Millennia's bathroom and all this stuff on them. So we know that it's not just all documents that we see of these pictures being taken, unless they were using documents and putting the documents with stuff that were going into stuff in like Melania's personal bathroom, which again, that will actually conflate with the Presidential Records Act that will come up here, which we will now explain. It says, establishes public ownership of all presidential records and defines the term presidential records. This was set in precedent in 1978, and this was created and received after the Reagan administration, so this is the first administration to really be hit with this. It says it requires the vice presidential records to be treated the same way as presidential records, which the vice president doesn't have the capacity to declassify things. So this also gets into a little bit of a, I would say, a thick weed scenario right here, because we have people like Joe Biden and Hillary Clinton that had documents in their home, and we saw Hillary Clinton when she like acid washed her entire email server, where she had like 33,000 emails that people ended up finding. But again, conversation for a different day, even though the context applies perfectly in the retaliation for how the government should have reacted to them and how they're reacting to Donald Trump. But, you know, these people are above the law because there is no objective standard in the law. As long as I'm the person who holds the power, I can manipulate the ends so I can come out with the benefit no matter what, because I can pay off the judges. So it says this requires the president to take and his staff to take all practical steps to file personal responsibility for the presidential records. The responsibility in the custody and management of incumbent presidential records lies with the president. And that is where we need to take this, that it lies with the president, because this is what they're pushing, and they're just completely bypassing this fact that as the president, you have the capacity to declassify these things. And it says it allows the incumbent president to dispose of the records that no longer have administrative, historical information, or evidentiary value once the views of the archivist of the United States on the proposed disposal have been obtained in writing. This is why this is so important, though, because this would be the breach for me for Trump when it comes to this, because it's talking about historical information or things that have current value. And the reason Donald Trump apparently took this is because they were pushing for war with certain countries. And this is a document from the Security Administration explaining this process, that they wanted to go ahead and push with war with certain countries. And these parts are redacted, and it says country A and country B, which we can allude to what those are in a bit when we're going through the document itself. So we'll go ahead and jump into that in just a moment. But the thing that I cannot stand with this is just the fact that ABC's article is titled effectively the same thing as CNN, because they just want to compound that narrative and blast it into your skull so you just have one instilled understanding of the situation itself, because everything outside of that won't have value to you, because you will have gotten your information from the establishment and you will have gotten your information from the people at the front of the room. And if you yourself wouldn't lie to your neighbor, why would the person who's supposed to be the expert at the front of the room lie to you, the person who should be relying on them, when you yourself wouldn't want to be someone who people could not rely on? So you apply this psychological context of thinking that these people share the same goodwill that you yourself do, but many of times they don't, and they're nefarious actors for nefarious intentions. So the Houston Chronicle, and I live in Houston, so I'm used to seeing the Houston Chronicle run absolutely ridiculous shit. And this is from their editorial board. It says, "For love of country, read the federal Trump indictment yourself." And they end up editorializing and just explaining and breaking it down in really small facets the same exact way that ABC does and CNN does, and they don't apply proper context. And we see this right here. We're going to go ahead and actually jump into the document itself and read the part that really matters, that people aren't asking any questions about, and when they are, they're not asking the right questions. Trump's disclosure of classified information in private meetings. In May 2021, Trump caused some of his boxes to be brought to his summer residence at the Bedminster Club, like the Mar-a-Lago Club after Trump's presidency. The Bedminster Club was not authorized location for the storage, possession, review, display, or discussion of classified documents. Again, this comes with the factor of where they would be getting Trump on the Presidential Records Act. Simple things like this. Not the nature that he couldn't declassify them, the nature of where he stored them. Which this also applies to someone like Joe Biden, who had his records from when he was vice president or when he was a senator just strewn about his garage and in his house, which his garage was unlocked at all times. And we see that if we're going to actually set an objective standard, that they should all be held to it. But nonetheless, they won't, because they're politically persecuting Donald Trump right now. Because this is Joe Biden effectively going after his political opposition for 2024. It says, on July 21st, 2021, when he was no longer president, Trump gave an interview in his office to the Bedminster Club to a writer and a publisher in connection with a then forthcoming book. Two members of Trump's staff also attended the interview, which was recorded in Trump's knowledge and consent. Before the interview, the media had published the reports that at the end of Trump's term as president, a senior military official, reportedly feared that Trump might order an attack on Country A, and the senior military official advised Trump against doing so. So, they're blaming Trump for saying that he wanted to start a war on his way out of his presidency. This is no small feat, because Donald Trump ran on ending the wars. He ran on making peace in the Middle East, which we actually see with things like the Abraham Accords, which is historic in itself. But we're not talking about that. What we're talking about is the fact that Donald Trump, the president who started No New Wars, is getting blamed by the political military establishment and the senior military official, in brackets, which I would assume it's someone along the lines of Antony Blinken, blaming Donald Trump for wanting to start a war with Country A, which what we will see soon is realistically, and if you apply the historical context of the understanding of things like the Project for a New American Century, we understand that this country for Country A is most likely Iran. And for Country B, we have Afghanistan. So let's go ahead and continue on with this. Upon greeting the writer, publisher, and his two staff members, Trump stated, "Look what I found. Look at what the senior military official's plan of attack. Read it and just show me. It's interesting." Later in the interview, Trump engaged in the following exchange. So we don't have the rest of that exchange, which sadly I would love to have been a fly on the wall to hear this, just so I could hear Trump wax and wane about all the nonsense of how people are just going after him and all this ridiculous stuff. And I wonder if he'd be doing his little isms and his little things of throwing his hands aside and, "They're not after me, they're after you, and I'm simply in the way," and all this other shit that he says. But we see here, upon greeting the writer and publisher, his two staff members, Trump stated, "Look what I found. Look at what senior military officials' plan of attack is, and they're trying to blame me and say, I want to attack X nation for Y reason because of Z cause." It says, Trump with, in brackets, senior military official. Let me see that. I'll show you an example. He said that I wanted to attack country A. Isn't it amazing? I have a big pile of papers. This thing just came up. Look, this was him. They presented me this. This is off the record, but they presented me this. This was him. This was the Department of Defense and him. And you really see Donald Trump emphasizing the fact that this wasn't me. I wasn't the person that was trying to start this war. No one is covering this. No one is covering this aspect about this document. It's just, well, Trump released classified documents and he didn't end up declassifying them and he didn't have the capacity through the Presidential Records Act. No one is talking about the fact that we are talking about people in the upper echelons of the military establishment and the intelligence division explaining that they want to start a war and blame Donald Trump for it on his way out. It says, we looked at some, this was him. This wasn't done by me, this was him. All sorts of stuff, pages long, look. And again, these are apparently not declassified, which under the Presidential Records Act, realistically, Trump handling these documents prior and taking them with him should have declassified them and given him the context to be free of this. But this is political persecution, so who knows how this is going to go. And maybe this is a misinterpretation on my part on understanding the Presidential Records Act. And if that's the case, please let me know in the comments below. I will gladly change my opinion as long as I am presented with something that is factually true. So, Trump states, I just found this. Isn't it amazing? This totally wins my case, you know? Staffer goes, mm-hmm. He says, I just found it. Isn't it amazing? This totally wins my case. And I just can't get over this. I have to read it twice to emphasize it. Trump believes that this will effectively remove the vilification from him because he believed that this was just another thing that they were going after him because realistically they were going after him the entire time he was the president. And Tucker Carlson covered this recently in one of his most recent episodes, that the reason that Donald Trump is being persecuted to the degree that he is because he was against the wars. He came out and said that the war in Iraq was an absolute disaster and that it was a travesty and that everything that happened there could have been avoided and that George W. Bush lied us into the war in Iraq. He said this at the Republican convention in North Carolina to what realistically started off as boos and then was a stunned silence, the same way that you saw a stunned silence when someone like Ron Paul rebutted to someone like Giuliani in the Giuliani moment when he said, no, I believe that the reason something like 9/11 happens is because of blowback. The CIA teaches us this word because when we attack them over there, they want to attack us over here. Because it's just observational understanding that when you hit someone, they very will likely hit you back because this is simple retaliation. But as we see, I'm just going to read it again because Trump says, I just found it. Isn't that amazing? This totally wins my case, you know? He thinks he's free and clear, but the thing is that Trump doesn't understand is that this is the entire political and military and intelligence establishment that's against him. And it doesn't really matter what you do many times because they run the game and you're simply a pawn on their board. So the staffer says, yeah, laughing. So, and you see Trump's staffers really not responding and saying much. And then it explains perfectly why when Trump says this. He says, secret. This is secret information. Look at this. You attack and then it cuts out. And I would, again, love to be a fly on the wall listening to that. This portion of the conversation to understand the nature of where this goes, where on the globe. And again, when it comes to something like this, journalists don't seem to answer or ask the simple questions and then answer the most simple ones that they can find themselves through observation. People don't ask who, what, when, where, and why. They don't do it anymore when it comes to journalism. They simply want to drip feed you what they want you to think because that's all that matters is that we can consistently push the curtails in the understanding of the establishment rather than the understanding of free and liberty-minded people. So, Trump says, declassify it. See, as president, I could have declassified it. And the guy says, yeah, he says, now I can't, but this is still a secret. Which, again, I wonder if this is a misunderstanding and a misinterpretation on Trump's part of his perception on the Presidential Records Act. But who knows, maybe this is my misunderstanding on it. After all, I wasn't the person who was president. But Trump says, isn't that interesting? At the time of this exchange, the writer, the publisher, and Trump's two staff members did not have security clearances or any need to know of any classified information about a plan of attack on Country A. In August of September 2021, when he was no longer president, Trump met in his office with the Bedminster Club with a representative of his Political Action Committee, the PAC. During the meeting, President Trump told that an ongoing military operation in Country B was not going well. Trump showed the PAC representative a classified map of Country B and told the PAC representative that he should not be showing the map to the PAC, the representative, and not be getting close to it. The PAC representatives did not have a security clearance and any need to know of classified information about this military operation. So, by simple, like I said, through simple observation and working yourself backwards that the establishment will lie at every single turn so they can consistently get you to their own ends, and you look at this and it says country A and country B, and you look at the nature of the structure of the Middle East and the process of, like I said, the Project for a New American Century, you can see where we have our military bases positioned. And if you look at the position of somewhere like, let's say, Iraq, and then somewhere like, let's say, Afghanistan, the war in Iraq was an absolute disaster, killing 1 million Iraqis, 5,000 soldiers, and then 14,000 after they came home. And now I believe it's 23 veterans a day that commit suicide. An absolute travesty, because we send them to go commit genocide and atrocities across the world so that they can then come home and feel scarred and shattered, and then no one's here to take care of them because Veterans Affairs fails them at every fucking turn. And what we see is we're talking about country A and country B. Country B, and we're talking about an occupation that's not going well, and the occupation that clearly didn't go well for the United States for 20 years was Afghanistan. And this gets me right here, because we're talking about country A and country B, and I will emphasize this over and over and over again, because I wish this would have just been released to people so that they could cover it. But even then, people like MSNBC, ABC, CBS, CNN, they will not talk about the fact that what we're talking about is specific countries, because it completely breaks the structure of what they've been delivering to people for the past 6 years. If we look at the structure of the Middle East, and I have a map on the wall that I'm looking here, we see that we have Iraq, Iran, and Afghanistan. And Iran is in between those two. And if you look at the structure of the military bases that are established throughout the Middle East, there are bases all along Iran's border. And we are the only country that does this across the entire globe, and it's because we are the world's empire. China doesn't do this, and they certainly don't do it in our sphere of influence because we have the Monroe Doctrine. If China was to establish borders effectively across Mexico's border, not along the United States border, but Mexico's border and other countries, so that it could sit there and be along the side of the country itself, and then drip feed their power into it, or so they could simply have their sphere of influence expanded into that of the United States, we would go to war with China, because you are dipping your toes into our pool of influence, and that violates the Monroe Doctrine. So, I really don't have anything else for this. That's all I've got. This is stunning. I will have absolutely everything linked in the description below. You can see these like black and white photos of Trump's documents and how they're just sprawled out everywhere, how they're just placed on the long walls and all these different things. I will have everything linked in the description below, as I always do. Give a thumbs up if you liked it, a thumbs down if you didn't. Share it if you liked it, and you know what? Tell someone you love them. Peace.